Speaking of Cults podcast is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from it is at the user's own risk. The views, information, or opinions expressed by the host and guests are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute medical or other professional advice. Hello and welcome to the Speaking of Cults podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Hey everybody. This week we're going to talk about something that is really, really hard to talk about. It is something that underpins so many of the foundations of cult control over people. And yet, at the same time, it is also something that can lead to so many difficulties in people's personal lives and professional lives, and misunderstandings, difficulties, inability to want to even understand it are rampant throughout our culture. And this has to do with responsibility. Oh, that big word. Oh, that weighty word. Oh, responsibility. I'm responsible. There's so much baggage connected with this concept. And there are so many twists and manipulations and turns that are taken with this word and words related to it, that it's not only loaded language, it becomes something that affects a person's morality, their entire sense of what's right and wrong, what's good and bad. It affects a person's self-image, how they think about themselves, how they see themselves, how much power they feel they have, how much control they feel they have over their lives. Different ideas of responsibility can lead people down delusional paths of control where they feel that they are in charge of, or somehow spiritually or magically or karmically, they are the ones who created everything that's happening in their lives. And this idea is so patently false. It is so blatantly wrong. And yet human beings will gravitate towards and cling to these ideas of control far beyond their real ability to control things because of how empowering it is. And it can really fool people. It can be quite heady, in fact. So I thought I might try my best, and this is a difficult effort, to clarify this concept. Because in cult recovery, you have to reclaim yourself, and you have to shed the cult facade or personality or the ideas, the habits. There's a lot of ways to describe this, but when you're in a cult, when you're in a bad situation, a predatory situation, coercive situation, right? All the same thing. Your self-image and your thinking and your emotions are not fully yours. You have given over to somebody else and you let them run it. You let them tell you what's what. You give your power over to them. And in a way, you pass your own responsibility over to them. And they deliver back to you false ideas, twisted ideas about who you are, what you're capable of, and your place in the world. And they exaggerate it. They dial everything up to 11. And they make you feel like the most powerful individual in the universe. But at the same time, they figure out a way to cut you off at the knees and make you feel powerless when compared to them, the cult leader. And they do it by twisting and manipulating your concept of responsibility, causation, and blame. These are three incredibly powerful words. And they are used almost uniformly across the boards when it comes to cults. These terms or these concepts or ideas related to them are used to control you, while giving you the impression that you're in charge, that everything that's happening is up to you, that you're in the driver's seat. But cults don't work that way. Cults don't put you in the driver's seat. You are 100% back in the passenger seats, and it's the cult leader who's driving this boat, right? So it's a pretty good idea in sorting things out after leaving a cult to sort out this idea of responsibility and to get it kind of straight for yourself so that you know what you are responsible for and what you're not, what you are cause over and what you're not, and what you should or shouldn't be blamed for. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into some of these ideas, and let's see if we can't clarify a few things. I've got notes. All of these terms, responsibility, blame, and causation, or cause, are related to or similar because they are related to actions and events. They are used to explain why something happened or who is involved. They involve assessing behavior and outcomes. And each one of these concepts is a way to understand the link between things that happen and the consequences of those things. Good, bad, right, wrong, these are all subjective valuations based on a person's viewpoint at the time. Within the framework or the context, you could say, the situation that they're in. A thing, an action can be good or bad, same action, depending entirely on the situation. Okay. And of course, the terms responsibility, causation, and blame have moral and ethical implications. They're often used in contexts where judgments about right and wrong are made. So these terms help clarify whether something's good or bad, right or wrong within that context, right? If you feel you're responsible, if you feel you're at cause, if you are to blame, all of these words give you different flavors of rightness or wrongness or goodness or badness. Blame, for example, is almost uniformly bad or wrong. I'm to blame. It's bad. The very word implies something's wrong. You screwed up. You did something bad. Whereas being responsible or being at cause is a more powerful and sort of good thing to be or have. And yet responsibility can be used in a very, very evil way to make people responsible, quote unquote, for things that they are not at all responsible for. So understanding this is kind of key. And there are differences between these terms. So let's start clarifying this. Responsibility refers to duty or obligation to perform or not perform an action. It implies accountability and the expectation to act in a certain way. And let's break this word down for a second. Let's just get right into it, right? Responsibility comes from the concept of response ability, the ability to respond, to have a response, to be able to produce a response, to be able to do something about the situation or person or individual, whatever it is that you are responsible for, the job, the group, the person, whatever. If you can't respond, how can you be responsible? You can't. And one of the traps of responsibility is to hold you responsible and yet make it that you cannot respond or do anything about the situation. It's a contrary thing. It's a setup. It's a setup to get you trapped in what's called a double bind, where you have two different ideas that are perhaps related to one another, but they're two different ideas and they are contrary to each other. They're mutually exclusive. They can't both be true. It can't be true that you are fully responsible for everything that happens around you, and yet you can't respond to or do anything about those things. Those two things don't go together, but that is often a double bind that is created by destructive cult leaders to mentally trap their followers. And we'll definitely be talking all about that here. Responsibility is often forward-looking concerning what one ought to do. It can be assigned or accepted. And it can be a moral responsibility, a legal, or a role-based, but depending on your job or your position. You're a father, you're a mother, that brings certain responsibilities. You are a senior to juniors under you, that has certain responsibilities. You are a junior to a senior, that has responsibilities. So, the position that you're in can determine this. There can be legal obligations. For example, everybody who drives is responsible for having a driver's license. That's a pretty uniform responsibility across the United States, and it's a legal duty. Or there are moral or ethical duties. For example, if you see somebody in pain, suffering on the sidewalk, you may have a moral responsibility or duty to maybe inquire and see what's going on. If they're laying there battered and bleeding, asking for help, you as a human being to that human being may feel some twinge of responsibility for that person or to that person because of your ethics or your morals or your senses of what's right and wrong. So responsibility can come from different places. It can the feeling of it or the assumption of it or the assignment of it can come from different places. And it basically emphasizes the role or duty of an individual in ensuring a particular outcome. You are responsible to do a thing, to make sure a thing happens, to make sure a condition is met, something like that. Maybe you have a job where your responsibility is to push certain buttons in a certain sequence, and that's your job, and you are responsible for that. You're the one pushing the buttons. You're the one who determines the sequence in which you're pushing them. Therefore, you are responsible for that action. And when we come to something like causation as a word, being cause, this is the relationship. This is identifying the factors that directly bring about an outcome. What is it that actually made this outcome or this consequence occur? And you can trace it back and you can see who did what to make that occur. And that would be causation. It's a factual determination about what events or actions led to a particular result. And it can be direct or indirect. You can cause something A to B, or you can indirectly cause something by doing A to B and then B goes to C. Well, A caused C in this little logic train via B, right? So you can be directly or indirectly causative over something. And blame, the word blame here comes in as a definition, involves assigning fault or guilt for a negative outcome. We don't usually use the word blame when we're talking about good, positive things. Sometimes we do, but very rarely. More often than not, way more often than not, when we use the word blame, the baggage that comes along with that word is something bad happened. Who was at cause? Who's responsible? All right, so it's a judgment that someone is responsible for a fault or wrongdoing. It's backwards looking. Blame is always something that happens after the fact. It can be personal or collective. You can blame a group or an individual. And it emphasizes not only fault or wrongdoing, but there's also almost inevitably with the concept of blame, there is the idea of a moral judgment. It involves often because people resist blame because it always it's almost always painted in a negative light. And this can have social consequences. Your group might think less of you, your family, your job, the club you're part of, your cult. All of these things you may lose social credit or standing if you are blamed for something and everybody looks at you, oh, he's the one who did that. And there will be various assumptions made when the word blame is used that you meant to do that. You did that on purpose. And if, of course, you have twisted ideas of responsibility, then, of course, you can be easily held responsible for any wrongdoing of any kind because you are ultimately responsible for everything you said or did or happened to you, right? And this can be very confusing for people, and it can twist up their entire life and their identity in these mental traps because there are real world consequences. It's not just some mind game. It's something that has real consequences in the real world. So let's take a look at just a couple examples of this. And I want to first emphasize sort of what we're going through here is sort of the right or correct definitions of this stuff. I thought we might try to sort of clarify what the right version of this is, and then maybe go into a couple examples of how cults use this to absolutely twist things up and make the cult leader always blameless, never at fault, never to blame, right? Never responsible. And yet somehow ultimately responsible. It's a very twisted thing. How do they do that? How do they do that? Well, here's an example of responsibility. A manager has the responsibility to ensure that a project is completed on time. This means they're accountable for the planning and execution of the project. Now, here is an example of somebody able to respond. The manager is the one who laid out the plans. The manager is the one who sees to the execution of those plans. He assigns, you do this, you do this, you do this. He's the one who decided those things. So if those things don't get done, he's the one who's responsible for that because he's the one who can now respond to, well, why did this project not get through? Why did it not get done? Why was it not successful? Or alternatively, why was it successful? How did it get pulled off? How did that happen? Well, it was manager. Manager planned it, executed it. There we go. That's a very clear-cut, easy to understand, but that's actually all there is to responsibility. It's just that concept right there. What did you do? Within your scope of action and ability, what did you do, and what consequences were there as a result of what you did? That's what can be traced back to you. That's what you can be responsible for. When we talk about causation, if a machine malfunctions and causes a production delay, the malfunction is the direct cause of the delay. It broke. Nobody made it break. It just broke. An investigation might look into what caused the malfunction. And here we may find a maintenance manager or someone else, an engineer or somebody who fell down on the job. Maybe it was within their scope of action and therefore their responsibility. Who can respond to this? Who is it that is behind this malfunction? Maybe no one. Maybe lightning hit it. Maybe a rock fell out of the sky. Maybe an ant crawled in there and the ant is responsible for the electronic malfunction of the machinery. Nothing anyone did could have predicted it, caused it, or prevented it. That's when no one's responsible. And to hold somebody responsible for pure happenstance or chance is a little off because they can't respond to it. There's nothing they could have done at any point along the line to predict or prevent that from happening. And yet people will be held responsible for such things all the time. And it's really not right. It messes up responsibility, and it's where a lot of the baggage in this word comes from. Now, blame, of course, if a machine malfunctioned due to a technician's negligence in performing regular maintenance. Now, here we have a whole different scenario. And here, the technician might rightfully be blamed for the production delay. Blame implies that the technician is at fault for not fulfilling their responsibility. Maybe their responsibility is to do daily maintenance, and maybe on Thursday they slacked off. And because they slacked off and didn't do the maintenance checklist properly, an ant got in the machine, and here we go. So It all depends on context, of course, and the situation as to whether somebody could be held to blame, held responsible, or not. Did they cause it or not? I'm going to keep emphasizing these words because understanding these concepts is key to analyzing these situations. And that's really, in a nutshell, in its simplicity, that's what responsibility is. We, in our society these days, have very overblown ideas of responsibility from our leadership, for example. I'll go here for a moment. And I don't mean to get political, but let's talk about government for a moment. Even at the state level, city level, can a mayor of a city be held responsible for a drought causing a problem with farmland around the city that the mayor is overseeing and in charge of? Is the mayor responsible for a drought? Of course not. The drought didn't come from the mayor. The mayor didn't cause the drought. And there was nothing at all that the mayor ever could have said or done to prevent that drought from happening. That was the weather, that was the sun, that was atmospheric conditions, that was soil conditions, that was, that was the rain, the earth. The mayor of the town can't be responsible for that. What the mayor of the town can be responsible for is whatever is within that mayor's scope of action. What can the mayor respond to? Well, the mayor can then move forward with, let's get some water out there, or let's find resources to overcome or compensate for this drought. Now, had the mayor not predicted this in light of information given to him that it was coming, hey, a drought's coming, and he didn't act on it, now that's what he can be responsible for, not acting on it. And that's what he can be held accountable for, is failing to act or failing to do something. But even then, a mayor's scope of action is limited by the city council, by the police and what they do, by the civil services that are under the mayor to execute the planning of the city. It's not just one person that all of this rolls up to, and they're ultimately responsible for everything going on underneath them. And yet, because we need to sometimes hold somebody to blame, we will roll that responsibility all the way up to the feet of the mayor, when the mayor could never have said or done anything about that situation. And this is a very common foible problem with groups of people, right? They need a scapegoat. They need somebody to blame. And it's also easy to do when, in the case of, here in the United States, the citizens often don't even understand the structure of their city government, much less their state government, much less the federal government. And this rolls on up the line, and various degrees of responsibility are assigned to our government leaders who, in fact, never could have done or said anything about those situations. And let's go broad for a second. Let's talk about something as crazy as the economy. And just on a broad stroke, okay? Nothing specific here, and I'm not talking left, right, red, blue. The economy is the sum total of all the exchanges and production of resources and management and moving and transfer and exchange of those resources across every state, across the world. All of these things affect our economy. No one person is in charge of any of it. There are very few people who can do anything about this vast system called our economy. And yet, so many people will roll the responsibility all the way to the top because they don't understand that, or they can't deal with that concept that there isn't really any one person responsible for the state of our economy. There are millions of factors at play when it comes to that, but people don't want to deal with that. It's too complicated. So they just want to blame somebody. And that's one of the reasons, one of the psychological reasons why this is such a difficult concept, is it's almost automatic with so many of us. That even whether we know or are aware of this or not, we just have this emotional, I need a scapegoat. I need somebody to blame for this. In and out of cults, that's people. And that's actually the sort of one of the emotional drives that cult leaders ride and use against you when they twist up responsibility. And how do they do that? All right. So if responsibility is a fairly simple concept, and it really is, just like we talked about here already, and if that's true, then how does it get messed up? How do people get all twisted up on this? There's a great deal of temporary, short-term, you could say, right? Power, empowerment, when a person is convinced that they are bigger, stronger, faster, more causative, more responsible than they really are. There's an awful lot of people in the world who are not taking much responsibility for the things that they actually should be taking responsibility for. There are deadbeat dads. There are deadbeat moms. There are bosses who show up to work and don't do anything all day long but get the paycheck. They never direct anybody. They never plan anything. They don't execute anything. Or when they do, it's haphazard at best, ignorant and silly. And their junior people see that and realize that their boss has no real concept of responsibility or what it is that they're there for. At the same time, there are plenty of people in junior positions who receive perfectly valid and good direction from their boss and fail to act on it because they just don't want to be responsible for their job. They're there for the paycheck. And they're not there to do actually any work at all. And it doesn't really mean anything to them, and they're not really there in their pitching. And they walk around blaming their boss, blaming society, blaming the economy for their inability to actually act responsibly. This is a universal problem across the boards through the workforce and through our personal lives, through family lives, et cetera. Right? We see examples of this daily. And it's rough. It's a rough situation because you can't. How do you force someone? How do you get someone to take responsibility for things they don't want to be responsible for? They don't want to have anything to do with it, right? They just want the benefits. They don't want to have to do any of the hard work or anything like that. You know, these are problems. These are big problems. But none of that changes what responsibility actually is. We can just see lots and lots of examples of this. And when people have this pointed out to them, right? Let's say somebody walks in to a church of Scientology, and as an example, and we're going to give a couple examples here today, but let's use this one because this is one I can easily talk about. And let's say that they do this personality test that the Scientology offers them, and their personality is displayed on a graph in front of them, and the idea of responsibility is one of the things on that graph, and maybe it's really out the bottom, and this person is self-professed in this test as being a pretty irresponsible person. And the Scientology evaluator looks at them and says, "Man, you got some responsibility issues, don't you? You know?" And the guy's like, "Oh, no, it's everybody else's to blame." And they go, No. Look, you're not happy. You're not doing well in life, and your responsibility is out the bottom. These things might have something to do with each other. And the fact of the matter is that the test evaluator is absolutely right in that case. Right? So the person goes, What do you mean? And they go, well, are you really being responsible for the various factors of your life? The person goes, well, I don't know. I'm just sort of sailing along, doing my thing, reporting to work. What am I responsible for? And they go, well, exactly. What are you responsible for? What is it that you're in charge of in your life? And by asking people questions like this, these are good questions to ask. What are you in charge of? What are you at cause over in your own life? And if the person is a normal, typical human being, their answer might usually be pretty much nothing. And they go, well, look, you actually can be and should be, and you should assume responsibility for this and this and this. I mean, are you responsible for the work you do? Are you responsible for the home you provide? Are you responsible for mowing the lawn? I mean, and the person goes, wow, I didn't really ever think about it that way. And they start thinking through the fact that they actually are in charge of or can be responsible for different things in their life. And then they take it one step further. See, that would be pretty good. But then we're going to drive it up one step further. Let's say you walk into a landmark forum seminar, or you went to an EST seminar, right? And you're going to listen to Werner Erhard tell you all about responsibility. What's he going to say? Here's what he's going to say. Responsibility begins with the willingness to take the stand that one is cause in the matter of one's life. It is a declaration, not an assertion. That is, it is a context from which one chooses to live. Responsibility is not burden, fault, praise, blame, credit, shame, or guilt. In responsibility, there is no evaluation of good or bad, right or wrong. There is simply what's so, and the stand you choose to take on what's so. Being responsible starts with the willingness to deal with a situation from the view of life that you are the generator of what you do, what you have, and what you are. That is not the truth. It is a place to stand. No one can make you responsible, nor can you impose responsibility on another. It is a grace you give yourself, an empowering context that leaves you with a say in the matter of life. And that, to an awful lot of people, sounds real good. And it's just right on the edge of the truth. And it puts them in a place where they think, maybe I can be in charge of my life. Maybe I can take hold of some of the things that are going on in my life, and I can do something about them. And that's a great place to be. That's a place I wish a lot more people were. That is an empowerment. That's a feeling of, oh, wait a minute, hang on. That's why I say it's right on the edge of what's right. Because there are all kinds of things in your life that you may or may not be doing something about that you could. And maybe you should. That's where responsibility comes in, is the kind of the shoulds. And we're all kind of aware of things that we fall down on, things we're not doing that we should be doing, things we are doing that maybe we shouldn't be doing, that kind of thing, right? We're all aware of this stuff. And so when Werner Erhard comes along and says, hey, man, you're the one who's in charge of what you do, what you say, what you have, what you are. It's empowering. Go, wow, yeah. L. Ron Hubbard takes it one step further. Oh, talk about dialing the levels up. When you talk about responsibility in Scientology, you get some let's just walk through it. The non-recognition, here's L. Ron Hubbard's definition, a deep, deep definition of responsibility. The non-recognition and denial of the right of intervention between oneself and any being, idea, matter, energy, space, time, or form, and the assumption of full right of determination over it. Now, there's a heady definition. Now, there's a definition that puts you 100% in the driver's seat. The non-recognition and denial of the right of intervention. So no one else has any right to get between you and this thing that you are responsible for. You are not recognizing anybody else's right to get in between you and it. The non-recognition and denial of the right of intervention between oneself and any being, idea, matter, energy, space, time, or form. You're the one who is assuming full right of determination over it. Well, good luck with that. Because this world is not run by any one person's determination. We are adrift in a sea of determinations. And we are buffeted about by the determinations of others as much as we try to buffet our way through life by directing and determining our own actions and state of being. Right? We're trying to navigate through life. We're trying to make our way through, and we're being hit but constantly by other people and their determinism, what they're wanting, what they're doing. And we can't control those other people. So the idea of full right of determination over anything contains within it a bit of a lie. But look at how empowering it is to feel like you have that full right of determination over something. Full responsibility is not fault, L. Ron Hubbard says. It is recognition of being cause. There's that word cause. This is why I brought this in today. It's recognition of being cause. Well, for those things that you are able to respond to, you can be cause. If it's within your sphere of action, you caused it. If you did cause it. Hubbard also goes on to say, responsibility also means a state, quality, or fact of being responsible, obviously. And, being the source or cause of something. Now, Hubbard says, I'm going to tell you something horrible. This is a direct quote from Hubbard. The second that you blame anything, including yourself, you elect a cause. This is a mind fuck here, what I'm reading to you. You elect something else to be responsible. You elect a dynamic to be responsible, and it becomes the cause, and you become the effect at that moment. Do you see how this would be? You fall downstairs and hurt your knee. This is, again, L. Ron Hubbard. And you say to Isabel, you pushed me. You suddenly have elected Isabel to be the cause. You fall downstairs, she pushed you, you pushed me. And just as certainly, you elected yourself to be the effect of her cause. Right? If she caused it, you were the effect of it. And from that moment on, Isabel is going to be more powerful than you. See, Hubbard had really weird ideas about cause and effect and about the power differential of those two positions. And Hubbard claimed, as he says here, that you need to be cause in every situation across your entire life at all times. And that is what responsibility is you being cause. She pushed you. Well, what did you do to cause that to happen? And you see immediately the trap there. You must be in the cause position. You must be in the driver's seat. You must be responsible for everything. Otherwise, you're letting other things have power and control over you. Well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but other things do have power and control over you regardless of how much responsibility you assume for the world. Death is happening to you, and there is nothing you can do about it. Taxes must be paid, and there is nothing you can do about it. You see what I mean? There are things that are going to happen to you that you are not cause over and never could be. Therefore, you can't be responsible for those things. What you can be responsible for is what you do, what you say, what you produce, what you're about. And even there, I'm going to point out something to you that might surprise you a little bit. Even with yourself, you're not really fully responsible for everything that's even going on in your head. If I say to you guys, the audience right now, to think of an elephant, how many of you just thought of an elephant? Did you cause that or did I? You see? If you thought of an elephant right now, I'm the one who's responsible for that. I caused that. I caused a thought to happen in your head. You're not responsible for that thought. There's lots of thoughts you have that you're not responsible for. But what you do with that thought, how you act based on that thought, now that's what you're responsible for. That's you causing your actions, right? But just because you have a thought doesn't mean you're responsible for it. So even everything having to do with you isn't necessarily your responsibility, in that you can't cause or be responsible for causing all the things that happen to you or all the things that you think. Something to think about, isn't it? It's weird. Here's another write-up on this, and I tell you who wrote this, but it comes from Scientologyanalysis.com. I dug this up. And here's the quote from this website. One person chooses to do something to another, and the person receiving the action is blamed for receiving it instead of the one who actually committed the action being blamed for creating it. This is a classic setup in almost any abusive relationship, where the recipient of abuse is blamed for having caused it somehow. And so the abuse can continue so long as the target's attention is on oneself as being cause, rather than properly recognizing the perpetrator as being the cause of the abuse. It is usually this point of recognition that leads to a correct view and an actual handling of the situation. And this is how, that's how they get you. They twist it. Right? This goes back to, remember bullies in the playground, right? They grab you and they start hitting you with your hand. They grab your hand and they start hitting you with your hand. Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? Remember that? Any of you experienced that? I sure as hell did. Who's responsible there? Well, obviously, any of us would look at that situation and we'd say, well, that bully, that's ridiculous, right? But every single cult member who's having that done to them, who's being beaten about by the cult leader, thinks they're the ones who are responsible. They are to blame. If somebody in David Miscavige's inner circle is being beaten by David Miscavige, they automatically assume they are somehow to blame for this. It's not him. They pissed him off. They did something bad. They did something wrong. This is classic conditioning thinking in any domestic violence situation where you have an abusive spouse. And they will blame and blame and blame their victim so that the victim takes responsibility for the abuse that's being rained down on them, and will therefore hold the abuser blameless and not responsible for what they are clearly responsible for. It's that twisted, and it's really kind of that simple of a mechanism, if you will. It's a thing. It's a manipulation. And it's so common in our society, and it's so common in families, and it's so common in our relationship with our leadership, with our governments, with our jobs, with our families, that all of us screw this up every day. So I thought I might try to offer just a little bit of like, hey, let's step back from this for a second and let's take a look at, without getting all heavy about it or philosophically ridiculous about it, let's just look at the simplicity of what responsibility really is. And all it really is things you can do something about, right? Things you can respond to. And I think if you reflect on this and think about this in terms of your own cult experience or domestic coercive situation experience or whatever has happened to you in your life, you will see examples of this all over the place, of good examples of this, of responsibility being properly utilized or properly thought of, and you'll find examples aplenty of where it's not. And what I'd like you to think about is not just examples of how this stuff screws up, but what were the consequences of that? What happened as a result of screwed up ideas about responsibility? Lots of bad things usually end up happening. What happened to you? What happened to other people? And the struggle, the fight for ex-cult members or for abuse victims or survivors is trying to get people to recognize where the responsibility really lies. If anything, that's the central theme of cult activism, is this group, this individual, this cult guru is responsible for these very, very atrocious, horrible things. And trying to get society or the law or the media or people to see this is what's really going on here. It can be an awful lot of work. And one of the reasons it can be so hard is because of these twisted ideas that people have on responsibility at every level of our society. Very few people have this really clear in their heads, if I'm being honest. Right? And I'm not even putting myself on any pedestal. I've got areas of my life, that are all confused and responsibilities all mixed up, right? It's a problem for all of us because we have egos. And we don't want to be held responsible. We don't want to be blamed for things we are responsible for. And at the same time, we get blamed for things we were not responsible for. It messes up on all ends of the equation. It makes it really hard. So, never said this was an easy thing to deal with. But if you have these ideas clearer in your head, then fewer of these cult abusers, these spouses, these family members, your boss at work, fewer of these people will be able to get one over on you if you actually understand this stuff and are clear in your own head about what you are and are not responsible for. And what you can or can't be at cause over, and therefore what you should be blamed for and what you shouldn't be blamed for. Just wanted to offer a little clarity this week. I hope it helps. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.